So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Chase. I'm a senior consultant with Improving, with quite a few years of experience as it relates to device or endpoint management. What used to be Configuration Manager, actually the entire System Center stack, pretty well versed in, as well as Intune, Microsoft Endpoint Manager now. Which obviously, as everyone's aware, Configuration Manager and Intune are now one product. They're Microsoft Endpoint Manager. When you're referring to the on-premise, you're talking about Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. And when you're talking about Intune, you're talking just about MEM itself. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started here. So how I want to cover this is to kind of explain to you guys the different ways, or to explain to everyone the different ways of getting your devices into the cloud. When you're discussing how you're going to do this or how you want to manage your devices in the cloud, you're kind of coming to a fork in the road. Do you have an on-premise environment currently that's running Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager? If not, are you just looking at Intune itself? So when you think about it, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager gives you the ability to attach your on-premise to the cloud or Intune, utilizing this method known as CoManagement. CoManagement then allows you to be able to take your objects or your devices that are in Configuration Manager on-prem and enroll those devices into Intune. And then you can make decisions on what workloads you want to manage within Intune, and what workloads you want Configuration Manager to manage. The other option is obviously that just the MEM or Intune only. So your devices are either hybrid Azure AD joined or they're just Azure AD joined, and they're fully managed from the cloud using MEM. So there's some benefits to this and there's some disadvantages to this. Some of the benefits to it obviously is if you're already fully cloud, there's really not much to it. The device is already, Azure AD joined, or if you're hybrid Azure AD joined, the enrollment's fairly simple. You can do group policy to do the enrollment and devices into Intune, whatnot. Disadvantages of it, you don't get the scalability or the flexibility that you would have by using the co-management feature within the on-prem Configuration Manager. While MEM offers things like autopilot, it does not offer things like a bare metal install, and it also does not manage server patching or server workloads. It only manages endpoints as it relates to Windows 10 or mobile devices such as iOS, iPad OS, and Android. So with that being said, there's some things to take in consideration when you're trying to determine which path is right for you. And I kind of discussed it a little bit already. The considerations are, where are you today and where is it you want to be? Are you currently leveraging Configuration Manager? So if so, maybe co-management's the path that should be taken. What's your licensing structure look like? There's licensing requirements as it relates to Intune. Doesn't matter whether you're going to be cloud only or if you're going to be co-managed. There's still some license considerations you need to take into consideration. There's things you need to think about in regards to what license level you want to be at and what features you want to leverage going forward from a cloud-centric standpoint. And the things that you really need to do, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on slides. Obviously, you're going to notice the slides are very, very thin on this because I want to spend a lot of time going over actual demo and showing you how things are kind of set up and configured and where to look at things at. Obviously, what you need to have a valid M365 E3 or higher license. Now that's for enterprise. Obviously, if you're looking for education, I believe it's A3 or above. Now you can also, for workforce, there is, Chris, now keep me honest on this, I believe it's the want to say it's F3 or F1, cannot remember. But you have to have one of those eligible licenses. And there's a link in the presentation, and I can bring that up in a moment and show you what that looks like. For OS support, you have to be at iOS 12 or higher, iPad OS 13 or higher, Mac OS 10.3 or above, Windows 10, or Android 5 or higher. The big thing you're going to need is time and patience. If you're used to managing things from an on-prem standpoint, understanding how a lot of those controls that you leveraged on-prem, what those relate to in Intune. So when you're talking about things like device configuration, so if you're looking at co-management, and you'll notice, and we'll discuss, and I'll show you this later, when you look at device configuration, when you think of device configuration, think of group policy. That's more or less the one-to-one relationship. It's not, I don't want you to think so much when it comes to the Windows devices, think of group policy. Device configuration as opposed to your mobile devices, it's a little bit different. It's giving you a little control on, how that device is going to be presented to the user and what they can and cannot do. So with all that being said, I'm going to give everybody a moment here. This is what we're going to be doing in the demo. I'm going to go over the co-management configuration and requirements. I will go over configuration policies, your app protection policies as it relates to mobile devices. We'll discuss, I'll give you an idea of what a compliance policy is and what Windows information protection is. I don't want to spend a lot of time on those because they're going to be covered in the next session, but I want to tee those up so you guys have them in the back of your head as you go forward and you come back to your next session. You'll have somewhat of an idea of what these things are that Rick will be talking about. I want to take one moment and see if anyone has any questions before I actually get into the demo.
No questions from the chat, so I think we're good.
All right, fantastic.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah.
Can you touch a little bit on the last bullet there, Windows Information Protection? What at a high level, what is WIP? Or are you going to get into that?
That is something we're going to get into.
Okay.
So, and that's why I have those in there. We're just going to, what are they? Why use them? I'm not really going to spend a ton of time on that. Like I said, because Rick is going to be covering those in more detail next month. So, okay. Since James brought the question up, I'll broach the subject now. Windows Information Protection is pretty much just what it is, what it states there. It's Windows Information Protection. It basically states what data can be shared within Windows. If you think about it, the one-to-one relationship, app protection policies more or less correlate to what Windows Information Protection is. So if you're familiar with app protection policies, and we'll go over that when we get there, app protection policies control what the user can do within those apps. Simple statement is, if you set a policy that says a user can't copy data from a app protected application to outside. So say you're doing an app protection policy on an Android device for Outlook, and you say that the user is not allowed to copy data outside of Outlook, or is only allowed to copy data between other app protected apps. If the user goes ahead and copies something from an email and they try and paste it into a text message, they'll get a message in the text message field that states that the company is protecting data and this action's not allowed, more or less. Don't have the exact verbiage, but it basically tells the user, you can't do this. If you're doing app protection and you have an app protection policy for a Outlook app and say Teams, and if you copy from Outlook and you want to put a copy or item out of Outlook into a Teams chat, you can do so. So if you're doing app protection policies and you can control what can be taken from a protected app and where it can be used at, where you can leverage that data. WIP is pretty much the same thing, but it's at a Windows level. And you can get a little bit more granular with Windows information protection than you can with app protection policies. So now that I've covered that, we won't talk about that towards the end unless someone has a question about it. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and first thing we want to look at is the co-management process with MEM. So let me go ahead and pull up my demo, my lab environment. So here I have my own lab environment set up. With this, there's things to take into consideration for co-management. First thing I'll do is discuss the things that you're going to need for co-management. Obviously, the licensing is a big one, so you need to have a valid license. The second is hybrid Azure AD join. So if you do not have hybrid Azure AD join, objects will synchronize between Configuration Manager and Intune, but they will not be co-managed. The co-management happens at the Azure AD join or the hybrid Azure AD mechanism. So when the user signs in, if that user is a Azure AD synced identity, that user, then that's what signals that device to now be a co-managed device, because it is a device that is being leveraged by an identity that is syncing with Azure AD. So you will need to have hybrid Azure AD join configured. And not going to go into much detail on that. It's really not the gist of this conversation. It's a very simple process. It literally is an installer that you download onto your domain controller, you run it, and you specify whatever settings you want and how you want it to do it. I can send some documentation out on that, or Chris and I can provide you guys with documentation or a link to Microsoft for that process. But it's not a very difficult process to set up. So in my environment, I have my hybrid Azure AD join configured. My co-management is already configured. To do so, what you would normally do is if I want to do co-management, I would just click on configure co-management here. Once I do that, it will bring me up a window that will allow me to attach to my tenant. So it'll let me sign into my tenant and configure my co-management settings. So if you notice here, I have my tenant onboarding. It will go ahead and this is where you would sign in. And you would configure these settings. Here, the important things to take into consideration, this will just upload device data. Now you can specify specific collections you want, or you can do all devices. I tend to do all devices just because I want to have more of a holistic view of what I'm looking at. And the reason being is Intune provides you with a lot of additional data around your device management. Once you have co-management configured and you have devices actually syncing or being uploaded to Intune. I enable endpoint analytics for devices uploaded. Endpoint analytics, if you guys are familiar with Windows Analytics, it's kind of like Windows Analytics, and it's also kind of like desktop analytics. It's not as granular as desktop analytics, but it gives you quite a bit of bang for your buck. And you can just specify your enrollment. You know, and here I went ahead and I state I want all my devices to be automatically enrolled. Now you have options. You can say I only want pilot devices. Okay. And you can specify what devices to do auto enrollment if you wanted. Now, obviously, I'm doing all devices. Now, we discussed here something to take into consideration too is creating your application for your configuration manager client. That will be something you'll want to do in Intune as well. Reason for that is if you once you move into the autopilot stuff, you're going to want to leverage the ConfigMan client on autopilot join machines if you have a co-management scenario going on. Workloads is just what it means. So there's different items within Configuration Manager and Intune that can be managed. In this here, basically stating what do I want to manage by ConfigMan and what do I want to manage by Intune. If you notice in my environment, I just have my endpoint protection configured. Reason being is that's the easiest workload to kind of start with. Compliance policies, device configs, client apps, any of these things, it's where you become a little bit, you spend a little bit more time investigating what you want to actually control where. So that's why I start out with endpoint protection. Plus endpoint protection as it relates to Intune or MEM, the actual controls and the capabilities that you have are actually, I would say, greater than they would be from Configuration Manager alone. Staging is just this. You can go ahead and do pilot staging. So if you wanted to do, you can do all your compliance policies, your device configs, all these things. So if you have a MOF file within ConfigMan, you can actually stage a lot of these items up into Intune. Overall, co-management is just that. It gives you the flexibility to leverage your on-prem environment and to slowly migrate workloads into Intune at a more methodical pace. So it gives you more time to, as I like to say, kick the tires, make sure that the things that you're setting up in Intune are exactly how you want them to be. If you look from within here, you'll notice also I have my Cloud Management Gateway. If anyone is familiar with Cloud Management Gateway, this is another item I would recommend that you leverage with your co-management. From within here, you can obviously monitor and you can determine your co-management, what's being co-managed, what's hybrid Azure AD joined, all these good things. It gives you a lot of data that's going to help you out. So with that being said, I kind of covered co-management as it relates to the ConfigMan side. So now let's look over at what we have in Intune. If I can get to it. Oh, I got to minimize my screen here. So as we look here, this is my Microsoft Endpoint Manager for my lab. I have my identities or my objects are co-managed. These two are servers. I am syncing those devices, but I cannot do co-management on those, again, because those are not Windows 10 devices. If I were to look at a device here, and I'm spending a little more time on this because I think it's important for you guys, this is where you're bang for your buck's at. You can more or less get a lot of data based on those devices. You know, if you have device compliance, one of the things we're going to discuss here is if you look at built-in device compliance on devices, there's a built-in device compliance in Intune. It will 90% of the time, if not 99% of the time, show an error because it's not looking for much of anything other than, I think it's company portals, the only thing it really looks for. So with that being said, if you don't have company portal on a device, it's going to show in an errored state. Notice here, I don't have any compliance policies. And this one here says, obviously, it has a compliance policy assigned, no. So that's another reason why it shows it's not compliant. So let's discuss application app protection policies. That'll be the first thing we'll cover. So if I were to look here, obviously we show all my devices. I can look a little bit deeper in here. I don't know how many people are familiar with Intune or worked with Intune. Obviously, these are things you can control. You can go by platform, Windows, iOS, iPad, OS, Mac OS, and Android. You can control enrollment or role devices, how you're going to enroll your devices, so on and so forth. Actually, since we're here, the first thing we'll discuss is compliance policies. So compliance policies are very simple to create. As you're creating lists, there's obviously, if you look here in your drop down, you've got quite a few different things to choose. You've got Android Device Administrator. This one here, I would say never choose because it is being deprecated. So you're going to want to choose Android Enterprise. There are some requirements with this as well. So if you're talking Android Enterprise, it is a recommendation that you create a Google Play business account that allows you to more or less publish applications and to basically deliver applications to the user basically from the Android store without having them have to go out and get those things. You can pull those down and make them required, so on and so forth. iOS, iPad OS, and Mac OS, similar requirements as Android Enterprise. You're required to have a I believe it's Apple Business Manager account, and you would also be required for enrollment for iOS devices. You would be required to have a certificate as it relates to iOS. And to show you those things, I will actually sign it to our tenant to kind of show you those things real quick. But let's just discuss as it relates to Windows 10 compliance policy. So obviously, if I choose Windows 10 or later and I choose my create, if you notice here, there's quite a bit of stuff in here that I can choose. We're going to kind of go over this. Obviously, you have to name it something. So if you look in here, you have different items you can choose. You can specify device health. So I can require that it's got BitLocker. I can require that secure boot's enabled. I can require device integrity's enabled. If you look at all these things, you put your little mouse pointer over us, it'll tell you a little bit more about each one of what those are. You can configure your device properties. So this is where you can specify that a device to be compliant has to be at a specific OS version and cannot be over a max OS version. I will say this, I configure a minimum OS version. I do not configure a max OS version. Reason being is I don't really care about if the version is above what my minimum is. Reason being is my minimum is set because maybe I have things that are specifically from a security standpoint. I want to make sure that they're not signing in with an operating system that is below a certain level. Because obviously for security purposes, if you're running a version Windows 10 1803, you're no longer in support. So that's a problem. We're not getting patches for you anymore. So you're posing a security risk to my environment by signing in with a device that's old. And then when you're doing your OS versions, I'm not quite sure why they still have mobile devices in here, since they really don't have a Windows Mobile anymore. So I'm assuming this stuff will eventually go away. So in this case, you would specify your version. Obviously, you have to do your major, minor build and revision. So you can't do 1803. You would have to do the full version for it to check. You can also specify configuration compliance. Now, what this states here is if I'm managing my workload, if you looked back on the co-management, as we discussed, and I said I was managing my compliance via Intune, what this is going to do, if I say require, it's also going to evaluate whatever compliance policies you may have specified against those devices in Configuration Manager. If those devices are not compliant within Configuration Manager, it does not matter if everything else that you configured here is compliant. The device will be marked non-compliant. This is where you can specify system security. So if you remember correctly earlier, I spoke about device configurations, and the correlation for device configurations would be group policy. Again, compliance policies are a lot of the same stuff. So when you're thinking of compliance policies and device configurations, group policy kind of goes hand in hand with these things. So some of these things are things that you may be doing today in group policy that you can shift to Intune. So obviously, if we go through these, I can specify, I can require the password to unlock the mobile device. I can simple passwords, I can block. I can do a lot of different things here. I can specify my encryption for data storage on the device, my device security. I can specify it has to have a firewall on, it has to have TPM, it has to have an antivirus, and it has to have anti-spyware. If we're looking at Defender, we'd say it's got to have Defender running on it, and it's got to be at this minimum version. If it's not compliant. So, and then obviously Microsoft Defender endpoint rules, this is where I can specify what it's going to do. So require the device to be at or under machine risk score. I'm not going to set any of these because I'm not going to save them. I'm not actually going to apply this to anything right now. Reason I'm not going to apply this to anything is because something also to take into consideration is there is usually about there's a several hour delay in applies for this stuff. So when the device checks back in is when it will apply those whatever policies you configured. Now, if it's a newly provisioned device or it's the first time a identity and hybrid Azure AD joined identity authenticates, it will apply them. But if you create this policy and say G Summers has already been signed in and working, and this is a brand new policy, it's not going to apply until it reevaluates. So obviously, and this is where you do your assignments. So what you have to think is this is going to go against users. Okay, so it's going to go against users and groups. Now, when you say groups, when I say groups, it's groups that have users, not groups that have devices. These policies get applied based off of the identity that is authenticating against hybrid Azure AD. Or Azure AD. So if I were to go in here, I'm going to say all users, I'll say next. And whatever settings you had would obviously be in the review and create. Right here is where you could specify when you're doing your actions for non-compliance, you can specify what to do with it with not compliant. So let's kind of go back and I'll show you that real quick. So right here, you notice here it says mark device non-compliant. You have an option to do other things. You can say, I'm going to send an email to the end user to notify them that their device is not compliant and contact the help desk. Or you can say, I'm retiring that device right away. When you retire the device, that means the device can't communicate, can't actually authenticate, and actually the user won't be able to use that device to get to the things they need. So keep that in the back of your mind. So as we have all these, I could go ahead and I can create this policy. I'm applying it to all users right now. It really doesn't matter because I have nothing configured in here. And this policy will apply to the user once the user identity actually authenticates against. That, in a nutshell, is a compliance policy as it relates to Windows 10. Now I'm going to pause for a moment to see if anybody has any questions, comments, or tomatoes they want to throw. All right. Nothing going once, going twice? All right, fantastic. Then let's go ahead and move on. So we talked about compliance policies. Well, let's talk about configuration profiles. Now, if you remember earlier, I said configuration policies or configuration profiles or policies are pretty much a one-to-one when it comes to group policy as it applies to Windows 10. If I look in here and I say I want to go ahead and do, if you notice again, same situation as a compliance policy when you're doing a device config. You can choose the Android Device Administrator, which is a no-no because it's being deprecated. Android Enterprise, iOS, iPad OS, Mac OS, Windows 10 or later, Windows 8.1 or later, and I would venture to say if you're running Windows 8.1 or Windows 8.1, it's a good idea to get onto Windows 10. Since Windows 8.1 we all know is one, it's a resource hog. Two, I don't know why anyone still would be running that if they didn't have to. So with that being said, I'm still going to go ahead and we're going to stick with our Windows 10 process. And again, the reason being is I don't have this obviously set up for iOS or Android, but I will show you guys examples of those from our actual improving tenant in a moment. So again, if I go Windows 10 or later, I want to draw a couple things out to you. There is something known as Settings Catalog. Currently, it's in preview. Settings Catalog is pretty much as close as you're going to get to a one-to-one relation with group policy. Remember I said group policy is pretty much a one-to-one relationship with configuration profiles. So if I look at my Settings Catalog, when I do my create, and I click on Add Settings, if you notice here, I've got a lot of stuff in here already. So I've got a lot of things I can choose from. I can set this as a kiosk browser. I can landman workstation. I can identify my licensing information. But what's this we have here? Administrative templates, just like group policy. So we can go in here and we can go into control panel, specify things for control panel. We can specify the personalization. We can specify programs if we wanted to. So we can say hide programs and features, hide installed updates. We can control what they can and can't see in the control panel if we want to. From a desktop standpoint, that's an odd one. Obviously, blank equals some things. So the subcategory is, okay, add, delete items, user, allow only bitmap wallpaper. So here's all your user settings you can specify. You can go in here, your Active Directory. So you can specify a lot of stuff in here, your Microsoft Security Guide. And I can spend probably a good 3-4 hours just going over configuration profiles and all the different things that you can do with them. But again, just so you have an understanding here, is if I create one of these, whatever settings I have against this, again, goes back to what is specified, when is that identity authenticated against it. So for giggles, let's go ahead and I'll say personalization. So let's say prevent changing desktop icons. No, you know what? I don't want to do that one. That would be too hard for me to really show you. So right here, for example, if I want to go ahead and select that setting, I can go ahead and specify, I don't want to display the lock screen, but maybe I want to display a specific background. So right here, force a specific background and accent. If I go ahead and say enable that, I can specify accent color for the device, my start background color for the device. There's a lot of different things you can do in here. So you can set your personalization just like you would today through group policy. And again, this will apply when the user authenticates. Once you do that, these are a little bit different. You can apply these to users or devices. But you do realize, again, when you come back to it, is I can apply it to the device. So that means any user that signs into a device that this is targeting, that setting is going to apply at the user level. Okay, so think of it as kind of like loopback policy processing. Okay, so I have, say, a device config that has a user setting in it. So once I do that, like I said, whatever user signs into that device that it's getting targeted to, that control is going to be in place. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just go with all users. I don't have any groups set up. Very simple process. Again, review and create. This is where it would show all your settings, including groups. Show your administrative template, what's set, what's not. Obviously, I have nothing really set. Everything's set to disabled. Create, and that will apply. How are we doing on time, Chris?
We've got about 20 minutes, maybe a little
Okay.
bit less to wrap up a little bit before 1.
Okay. So we're going to just talk about app protection policies, and I'm not going to show you that in the test tenant. Reason being is because you're going to get more out of it if I show you from our actual tenant. So let me go ahead and sign into our actual tenant. So here, if you notice, and the reason I'm showing app protection policies from our tenant is because Windows information protection relates more to the Windows side than it does for app protection, as opposed to app protection applied to the mobile aspect. You can do some app protection from a Windows standpoint, but your most bang for your buck, your important thing you're going to get out of it is if you're doing WIP. So if we were looking here, and I can go ahead and I can show all my apps. Obviously, these are all the apps I have here. But let's talk at app protection policies. One of the things you'll notice if you're reading a documentation from Microsoft and they talk about creating an app protection policy, they tend to say, okay, you have one app protection policy and it has all your apps in it. There's two schools of thought on that, and I'm gonna explain to you what they are and why I do it the way I do it. I do an app protection policy based on each application. I do that for a supportability reasoning. One of the things that happens is if an app protection policy fails to apply, if you have one giant app protection policy and you do the troubleshooter against the user, it just shows you the app protection policy name that failed. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of detail in it as to what failed within it. It just, so if I had iOS app protection and I had Edge, OneDrive, Outlook, and Teams in it, all I would know is my iOS app protection failed. I couldn't really dig down too deep into it. What you would have to do at that point is you would have to get the logs from the device for the user, which you'll still probably have to get anyhow, but at least you're a step further in understanding which app protection policy is problematic for the user. So one of the things to kind of look at, and I'm just going to cover with you and kind of show you here, is this is our Edge browser app protection policy. And if you look in here, there's things I have set in here. I can control, what data can transfer to the telecommunications data. So if I want to go ahead and say, this is, you get an email, and in the email, there's a phone number. Now you should be able to click on the phone number or tap on the phone number and launch the dialer. If you don't have this set, it's not going to allow you to launch the dialer. So there's things you can prevent backups. You can control where the org data is sent to within other apps. So in my case, I usually do policy managed apps with open in share filtering, meaning that it's allowing data in and out, or it's allowing data in but not necessarily out. So I'm allowing to send org data to other applications, but I'm not necessarily allowing data in. It's a weird thing to think of. And then again, this comes back to the time. You're going to want to take some time and really kind of understand what it is you're setting when you're doing these. You can restrict the cut, copy, and paste between other apps. Notice here, this is what I was talking about earlier when I said if you copy if you block this and you say it's not allowed to copy data, okay? If I copy data out of Outlook and it's a app protected app, I can't copy it into my SMS messaging, okay, or iMessage. It will give you a message saying it's not allowed. There is quite a few settings that you can set within here as it relates to iOS. Similar situation sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Similar situation for your app protection for Android. Android gets a little bit dicier because there's so many different flavors of Android, because every OEM takes Android and they customize it to their needs. So there's some different things that you can do with Android, so it gives you a little more flexibility. But what you need to know then for that flexibility is what they call help me out, Griff, are you on?
Yes. Yep, I'm on.
So you have to basically set a URI. That's the word I was looking for. So you have to set the URI for whatever application it is to allow that communication between an app protected app and a non-app protected app. So if you wanted to allow them to copy data from, Outlook per se, and you wanted them to copy it into a note application for Android. Forgive me, I don't have an Android device, so I don't know what the equivalent of that would be is. You would have to have the URI for that to allow that to happen. And that's where you're getting your custom apps. So there's a lot of different things that you can do here as it relates to Intune app protection. Really, what I kind of want to show you though is the troubleshooting and support. To me, this is what you'll probably spend a lot of time in once you do actually do some of this stuff. So if I were to look at, see if James is in here. So if I were to look at James here, I can look at everything that's happening here. So I can look at my assignments, what client apps he's getting. I can look at his compliance policies, if he has any associated, configuration profiles, app protection policies. So here you notice, here's my Android app protection policies that are applying. This is why I stated that if we had one single app protection policy, this is what you would see. Now notice when I clicked on it, it just took me to the app protection policy. That doesn't really do me much good. Again, that's why I break them out into separate app protection policies. That way I know which one failed. Then I can talk to the user a little bit more. Obviously, you can look at PowerShell scripts, enrollment restrictions, so on and so forth. But this is where you're going to spend, anytime you have a user with an issue, this is where you're going to spend some time. And actually, if you have any issues with enrollments, this is where you'll spend a lot of time as well, because it will tell you as much information as you could possibly get from this area. So we could look at devices, and it'll give me information about my devices. So we already talked about Windows information protection, and we kind of talked about compliance policies a little bit as well. I spent a little bit of time on compliance policy. I feel like I kind of stole a little bit of thunder from Rick, but I think Rick's going to really be able to delve a lot more into it, especially as it relates to your compliance policies as it relates to mobile. Compliance policies as it relates to Windows, a little bit different. Again, think of it as kind of like group policy. Does anyone have any questions?
All right.
Well-
I don't see any questions in our chat. So I'm assuming there's no other questions. Ken, did you have other content you were going to go through, or were you just wrapping up?
No, that was pretty much wrapping up. You know, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions. Hopefully you found some value in this. Obviously here at Improving, we're here to support you guys in any way that we can, especially as our CSP customers. So obviously if there's any questions or concerns, or after this session's over with, feel free to reach out to us, and maybe we can point you guys in the right direction and help you on this journey of what is Intune and co-management.
All right. Great. Ken, do you mind bringing up your PowerPoint? The last slide there should be our schedule for our future sessions.
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for joining in our session today. Just pointing out that we do have another session scheduled next month, in which Rick Streckel from our improvement side will be diving into device compliance. So we'll be going a lot deeper into some of the compliance policies, enforcing and using compliance signals. So definitely a good session to follow up, kind of build upon what Ken has talked about with pushing out configurations from the cloud. We do have recordings of all of our previous sessions on our website. So if you go to https://improvement.com, services, cloud solution provider, you can find a recording of all of our previous webinar sessions there. I did post a link in our chat for a feedback form. We do appreciate any feedback that we can receive. Again, we try to make these webinar sessions as valuable to you as possible. We want to give you the most benefit. So we want to make sure we're addressing the topics and the technologies that you want to hear about. So use that feedback form to provide us any details, especially if there's anything specific that you want to see in our upcoming sessions. We'll take any recommendations or suggestions or requests to dive into anything specific on any of those topics we have listed here. We'll make sure we address anything that comes back to us in the feedback form. But with that, again, thank you everyone for attending today. We'll stick on for a little bit more, for a few more minutes to answer any questions, but I will go ahead and stop the recording. I appreciate everyone's time and have a good rest of the afternoon. And thank you, Ken. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.